Merry belated Christmas, everyone. This episode of the podcast is going to be a rebroadcast of an interview that I just did on the End Times Continue, hosted by Ace Archist and Dean of Dino Files. People will recognize from this podcast way early on in this show if you want to go search the archives. We talked about the Christmas truce of 1914, and we also talked about killing in war in my documentary, Why Can't Johnny Kill? So welcome back to Vital Descent. I'm your host, Patrick McFarlane. This one is episode 242. Show notes may be found at vitaldescent.com/242. I would all suggest that you guys go and listen to the original episode because it was about 3.5 hours long, but I've cut it down to an hour and some change where we talk about the Christmas truce and then we talk about my documentary and really get in depth about some things that I haven't talked about before in terms of my research going into that documentary. However, the extra time that stayed on the cutting room floor for this episode is up in its entirety at the End Times Continue, which you can find at airad.io/TETC. That's the URL for the episode. And you'll find it there. But for the other part of the time, we got into a lot of really personal topics, including kind of the state of the liberty movement, me expounding upon my thoughts from the last episode, which I generally got a pretty good response for. So I do appreciate that. Some of those things, I usually keep my mouth shut on stuff like that, but I decided, fuck it. So anyways, we also talked about those topics. We talked about Dean he's a law student preparing for the bar exam. So we talked a lot of war stories from the law, which I think are interesting that you guys would be interested in, but I don't usually talk about on this show. And we also talked about personal stuff in terms of what I did during COVID with those town hall speeches that I gave and local activism. We also talked about staying motivated and dealing with procrastination issues and trying to strive for success in your personal life. So those topics are, stayed on the cutting room floor. Go check them out. airad.io/TETC. So that's Dean's website over there. All right. So without further ado, here's my guest appearance on the End Times Continue.
We're living through one of those changes that historians will mark the end of one era and mark the beginning of another.
TETC. The End Times Continue.
Welcome to the End Times Continue, recording on this, the 18th of December, but it doesn't really matter because this episode is going to be kind of timeless.
Yeah.
Sort of like
released on Christmas. Oh, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yes, Merry Christmas, everyone. I'm so happy you've decided to listen to this, probably on the Monday after, but that's okay. It's expected. Yeah, this is going to be an episode that's kind of timeless, sort of like our 9/11 episode. I'm sorry, I am Dino and you are.
And I am Ace. And we have a very, very special guest with us. And we're talking about a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a long time. We're talking about two topics, but one will dovetail very nicely into the other. But we're talking about the Christmas truce of World War I, which I actually find a lot of people don't know about. And I didn't know about it for a long time either. And it's one of my favorite historical events. It's one of my favorite, true Christmas stories that I've ever encountered. So
absolutely,
we're joined by Patrick McFarlane. Patrick, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for people? Give some plugs at the start, just so people know who you are.
Yeah, hey guys, thanks for having me on. Really glad to be joining you for this topic. My name is Patrick McFarlane. I'm a practicing attorney. I have my own solo practice in Wisconsin where I do criminal and family law. And I'm also the Justin Raimondo Fellow at the Libertarian Institute, where I write columns and mostly about foreign policy, but also about politics and libertarianism. My show is called Vital Descent, and you can find it at vitaldescent.com. It's a weekly show where I focus mostly on the great power competition, Cold War 2.0 that's currently going on that not a lot of people realize is going on.
Yep.
So that's what I do.
Excellent.
Awesome. Yeah. No, we're so glad to have you. We've wanted to do this topic for a while, and we knew you were the perfect person to like bring on about this, because you also did a documentary that we'll touch on in a little bit after we touch on the Christmas truce, that dovetails very nicely into like what the Christmas truce was about and like how it happened.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's the Christmas truce is a fascinating kind of topic. And your documentary that we're going to talk about, why Johnny can't kill, or why can't Johnny kill? I always can't remember which order those words go in. Which order do they go in?
It's why can't Johnny kill? And I think I stole it from Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who wrote the book about it, and he's an unsavory character, but we'll get into that.
All right, so. The Christmas truce. Everybody here knows about it. Yeah. Everybody on the show right now knows about it, but it's not really talked about in detail anywhere. And the things that do get talked about tend to be a little bit mythical. Like it's
the first time I learned about the Christmas truce, it was a Sainsbury Christmas ad commercial. They dramatized. Yes. So Sainsbury, which is it's a supermarket in the UK, they did a commercial dramatizing the Christmas truce. And it had to have been like 8-10 years ago, I think, something like that. It came out, and that was the first time I ever learned about it.
Why did you have occasion to see a Sainsbury ad?
I don't remember. It was just on TV. It was just on TV. I've never been to the UK. It was just on TV somewhere. I don't know. The ad actually got pretty popular because it's actually really good. It's a really good dramatization. Some things are, I think, like historically inaccurate, but the spirit of it is the same. It's really good.
Well, I first heard about it from that movie Joyeux Noël, which I don't know if it was either a French movie or a German movie that it starred this Daniel Bruhl, who's a German actor who was also in All Quiet on the Western Front, that film that just came out on Netflix.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I saw that movie a long time ago, and I think that's the first time I really heard about it.
Okay. What about you, Dean? When was the first time? Do you remember the first time you heard about it, or like?
I believe I learned about it on Tumblr.
All right.
That's not a joke. I think if I'm not mistaken, I was scrolling through Tumblr and somebody had posted, it was like a did you know style post of like on Christmas in 1914, both sides of it was mythologized. It was like both sides on the war got out of their trenches and had a football game and celebrated Christmas, which is kind of sort of true. It's not how it's often mythologized to have been. The whole front didn't shut down, and I've got some clips about that, but. By the way, I want to acknowledge sources, but so I don't have to do it throughout the show. I've got some clips from a timeline video. They upload documentaries to YouTube, and I believe it's just the History Channel documentary that they uploaded. And then I've got, a clip from the Christmas truce, what really happened in the turns of 1914 from the Imperial War Museums also on YouTube. That's where I pulled my clips. And then I did some reading, some extraneous reading, but those are the sources of the clips, and now I don't have to say that again. So this is one of the things when we imagine World War II, like to me anyway, World War I is just horrific trench warfare, chemical attacks, trench foot.
The first introduction of tanks.
Yes, right. Living in a hole in the ground and periodically getting shot and shelled for weeks on end. That is how I imagine World War I. And I think that's mostly accurate from November of 1914. The war, like the British, the war, all the parties involved at the beginning of the war entered by July of 1914. But there was it was a way more mobile war at the very, very beginning. Everyone's trying to outflank each other, and there was this thing called the Race to the Sea after the Battle of the Marne. there was the race to the sea. Everyone's trying to outflank each other to the north, and they're basically racing to the English Channel. Mm-hmm. And that pretty much ended in late October, early November, and that's when the entrenchment began. So entrenchment, the trench warfare part of World War I really started in November of 1914. And that's where the nugget of what we imagine World War I to be kind of began. And I think it's important to note that because December of 1914 is a unique time in World War I. It's the war is fresh. Everyone was told they were going to be home by Christmas, but they're realizing now they're not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was not yet the knockdown drag out thing that it would be.
Right.
And I think it's important to understand kind of that context sort of surrounding it. It's also important the troops in the field were largely still regulars at this time. It wasn't a bunch of conscripts yet. These were professional armies that were being fielded at this time, and there was some churn, and there were some reservists brought up and stuff, but it was a professional army. These weren't conscripts at this point in the war.
Right.
Which also matters to some extent, especially with regard to how it ended, how the truce came to a close. And the story really starts on Christmas Eve. So
yeah,
I have a clip regarding that. I look at my clip list because I had my clips listed out of order. So I need to look at my clip list and make sure that number one is actually the first one I want to play. Here we go.
I think it's really important, before you start, I think it's really important for people to remember, they thought they'd be home by Christmas. Mm-hmm. That is a very important part, because like they all assumed, oh yeah, this will be, relatively short and we'll be back by Christmas. And then that obviously did not happen.
It's also important, I think, to note, and I'm glad you stopped me, because it was also not so much the French that did this. Mm-hmm. There were some Belgians. It was Germans, and mostly the British.
Yeah. Because
the French weren't in too good a mood, considering they were fighting in France. It was occupied. They were not in a friendly mood with the Germans, but the British, being the sort of detached party that they were, this mostly happened along British lines in the north.
Yeah.
And so we begin on Christmas Eve with my clip number 2.
Things really start to change on Christmas Eve. Now, why is that? The German family would celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve. That's when they would have the big meal. That's when they'd give the presents. A lot of the traditions of the German Christmas are what we fondly think are ours. Christmas trees, that comes from Germany. On Christmas Eve, the Germans start to celebrate their Christmas. Their post is delivered from home. They've got their letters from their family. That makes them feel warm, even if they're freezing cold. They've got they start to put up Christmas trees. They're sent lots of Christmas trees from home. They put them up in the trenches. They decorate them with candles. There's lots of accounts that the Christmas trees appear above their trenches with lights, and they start singing carols.
Yeah, I just thought they start singing carols.
I was laughing because I wondered why my family always does everything for Christmas on Christmas Eve, like open presents and stuff. I guess it's the German.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
My family's always done that too. We've always done family Christmas on Christmas Eve and then Santa shit on Christmas Day. Like that was always the order that we did things in. We would open presents from the family and do our exchanges of gifts and things on Christmas Eve, and then Christmas Day, that was the day of. Honestly, it was kind of just like a day of rest. We would all just kind of hang out and we open the Santa presents or whatever for whatever they were that year, and then we would just kind of chill.
If I remember correctly. So as the clip said, I believe the Germans started, and on Christmas Eve, the Germans started singing Christmas carols like Holy Night and a few others. And the British soldiers the British soldiers are on the other side of no man's land. They're on another trench a ways away, but they can overhear this going on.
Yes.
And I believe they start singing back, if I remember correctly.
They did?
you really get this like really touching moment of like, the war just stops for a day or two.
Right.
And it's a great moment.
And they're yelling back and forth. And one of the things that there was a letter that was read in one of the documentaries I was watching that said, it was written by an Englishman back to his family. And he said that they heard basically shouting from the other side saying, tomorrow, shoot, we know shoot.
Mm-hmm.
Like just basically trying to make an ad hoc ceasefire for Christmas.
Yeah.
There is also, I do think it's important though, like I said, many cases of the telling of this story have been mythologized and sort of made into fairy tales. It is true that not everywhere along the front, even along British lines, did this sort of effect happen. Here's another telling of what happened on Christmas Eve. In 1914.
I found the Boches' trench looking like the Thames on Henley Regatta night. They'd got little Christmas trees burning all along the parapet of their trench, no truce had been proclaimed, and I was all for not allowing the blighters to enjoy themselves, especially as they'd killed one of our men that afternoon. But my captain, who hadn't seen our wounded going mad and slowly dying outside the German trenches on the Aisne, wouldn't let me shoot. However, I soon had an excuse as when the Germans fired at us, so I quickly lined up my platoon and had all those Christmas trees down and out.
That's from a letter written home by an English soldier.
Mm-hmm.
So, not everyone's feeling Christmassy. It's the middle of a war.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because we were talking at the beginning of the episode about how there's a lot of people that don't know about this event.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of the reason is probably because it's so unbelievable. I mean,
yes,
the uniqueness of it is really
100%
hard to believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's one of those things like, you would see in a movie or a story, like some really inspirational type movie that I think a lot of people who are more cynical would think, oh, that happens in stories if that doesn't happen in real life. But no, this is something that actually did happen in real life. As small and, isolated as it may be, it's still important. It's still a very important thing to note in history.
Now, some of the other things too that I found just in doing some reading was that there were other ceasefires during World War I, like informal ceasefires, ones that were just arranged between the soldiers, but nothing as widespread as this, and nothing as as intense as this. And part of it was because in trench warfare, you had this weird situation where soldiers were spending time in close proximity to the enemy for extended periods of time, in a way that didn't exist. I mean, I've heard some things about like during the Civil War in the United States, sometimes the armies were camped so close that during the night you could hear the enemy like merrymaking and stuff, and you could yell back and forth. And during the American Civil War, there were informal ceasefires kind of like this too. So although it is something that is incredible and wonderful and highly documented, it's not a one-off occasion.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
It's special because it's Christmas, not because this isn't something soldiers do periodically.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, to be fair, it was huge. It was a large thing.
Oh yeah.
So, and one of the things that I came across was a lot of people talking about this, and sort of the question being, like, where were the officers? Where were like the NCOs and the officers who would be? I mean, this is very much not in their interest to let this kind of thing happen. And it seems as though, based on the things that I watched, at least for the NCOs, this was non-commissioned officers. This was actually something that they kind of set up, because after the night where the Germans are putting up lights and they're putting up candles in jars all up along the parapet, and they're putting up the Christmas trees, and they're singing carols, and the British are singing with them after a certain point. Again, this is sporadically sort of down the line. It's not the entire British line, but smatterings and spatterings of this is going on. And when the morning comes, it's Christmas Day, and it seems like everyone kind of, not everyone, but where this happened, they kind of started out with funeral services, and I have a clip about this right here.
In many places, the initial motivation for the Christmas Day truce is to bury the dead.
At
about 9 a.m. on Christmas Day, an English officer, accompanied by 2 of his men, came across and asked for a ceasefire until midnight to bury the dead. This was willingly granted.
The officer came out. We gravely saluted each other, and I then pointed to 9 dead Germans lying in midfield and suggested burying them, which both sides proceeded to do. We gave them some wooden crosses for them, which completely won them over, and soon the men were on the best terms and laughing.
There were funeral services held down the line in no man's land where they were burying their dead. And these were mixed funeral services too. There are a couple of accounts of real funeral services with people giving prayers in German and in English for the dead. That's quite a way to start your Christmas day, I guess.
Like what a powerful moment, because like you have British helping bury Germans and then Germans helping bury British soldiers. It's really powerful.
It really is. That's how the Christmas Day truce kind of began. It started with let's collect our dead and let's try and clean up a little bit. And before long, everyone's kind of talking, and I say everyone where this was happening is exchanging gifts. They're exchanging. It seems like in a lot of the accounts that I was looking at, it seems like the British kind of had like canned meat to exchange for cigars.
Yes.
So it wasn't necessarily even value gift exchange, but But there was
the thought that counts.
Oh yeah, absolutely, especially in a fucking war zone. But that's there. So they were exchanging gifts and they were hanging out and communicating in whatever way they could. There were a lot of accounts of people kind of like signing to try and communicate, but a lot of Germans knew English. So there was a lot of communication in English back and forth between the men, and this fraternization, this evil fraternization, became sort of a day where they just hung out together.
Yeah, they played a few sports, I think, if I remember correctly, and
some of the British historians I was watching were very upset that there is this myth of a big football game and stuff, and they were really, really upset that there wasn't okay, I don't give a shit about I don't care about soccer, so there's this idea that they played football in no man's land, right? They played soccer in no man's land, which is, I mean, it's not like it was a big organized soccer game. I didn't imagine when I first heard that, I didn't imagine they had goals and rules and referees.
Right. It was just like throwing a ball around.
Yeah, it would be just like tossing a football around for Americans. But they had the British historians kept calling it a kickabout, and they were very upset with the misconception that there were like rules and goals and referees in these few places where they did this.
That's one of the most British things ever. To get all upset about not following those rules.
Well, if they played an actual game, then, if one side gets upset over, perceived slight or something, then they might start shooting again.
That's right. That's a good point. Yeah.
Right. But there were some fucking cynical Brits. I was watching this documentary, and these British historians are so cynical about this whole event. But which I guess, I don't know, is it a cultural? I don't know. But they were describing these ad hoc kind of quote unquote soccer games, that it was really just 12 or 13 guys who kicking around a soccer ball at one spot on the front, and this happened in a couple of places. Is kind of how it seems to have been. But these guys were shooting at each other the day before, so I think it's kind of important.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like the moment itself is extremely powerful, like on a deep human level, right? I think it encapsulates this idea that when we're talking about war, is that it just doesn't have to happen.
Yeah.
But as unrealistic as we might think it is, both sides could just say, no, I'm not going to shoot the other person.
Well, that's kind of how World War I ended. The end of World War I is where guys are turning around and shooting their officers. World War I didn't end because everybody just kind of said, all right, the Germans lose, let's go home. It was there was an to hear Dan Carlin tell it, it's like the intellectual contagion of communism was in the trenches, and they were an intellectual contagion in that it's an ideology that spreads, and they were starting to kind of see the guys on the other side of no man's land as the working class, just like them. And there was it wasn't like this across the board, but there was a sort of a turning against the war machine of World War I by the guys in the trenches that sort of forced the close of the war in a lot of ways. That's not universally true across the entire war, but that was a major effect that led to the close of World War I, was the fact that the guys at the front just said, fuck this, we're done. We want to go home.
Yep.
Sorry,
I just couldn't
drink
imagine.
coffee.
I couldn't imagine being in that situation.
No, me neither.
After the long years of war, and not just the long years of war, but being in the most miserable, bloodiest, most violent conflict the world has ever seen, in a new type of war, really.
Yep.
And in the misery of it, just is unfathomable.
But it makes sense, too, why, especially at the beginning of that thing, when there's not as much bad blood as there could be, it's professional soldiers. It makes sense that they would take the opportunity to just sort of relax and have a Christmas, even if it's with the guys on the other side.
Yeah. I think it's also like, just as you were saying, but it's very powerful to be even given that they're professional soldiers, still the fact that they were, as you said, they were shooting each other just the day before, and they're just like, you know what, we're not doing this today. We don't have to do this today, and we just don't have to. Yeah, and at a certain point, even if the officers, because I don't know how many officers were in favor or opposed to it, but even if the officers were opposed to it, there was they couldn't stop them all, right? If they all just decided to drop their arms and they're like, we're not going to do this, the officers realistically have no power to stop them. So it's just a really beautiful moment in human history.
Absolutely. And it didn't happen again through the war. There was not another sort of widespread, there may have been sporadic ones, but there was not
there
another
were sporadic truces, but not not like this.
There was not a big sort of Christmas truce that you could write home about, that kind of thing. That wasn't really anything that happened again, and it kind of had to be forced. There is a and as a result too of a lot of bad blood that builds up between two sides of a conflict that goes on for years. But I do have a clip here from that IWM video about sort of how this never happened again, and the causes behind that. And I think it's very, very interesting.
The Christmas truce was unique, and nothing like it happened again to that scale. And the reasons for this are varied. Immediately after the truce, the high command of both sides stepped in to make sure that fraternisation and ceasefires like this would not happen in the same way. But also, in the long term, the real reason that truces like this didn't happen is that the war changed in the way in which it was being fought. As the war progressed, there's a more centralised method of command. Those in the front line would have been forced into constant aggression. You would have had artillery and trench mortar units constantly going. And also, of course, as the war progressed, it took a far nastier turn. So you get things like gas warfare introduced, an increasing number of civilian casualties. You also get incidents like the sinking of the Lusitania. The temptation, I suppose, to empathise with the enemy and the desire to fraternise with them changed dramatically from 1915 onwards.
So that's his perspective on why this kind of thing never happened again, is because eventually you just get so much bad blood. And that's why I wanted to start off by saying that this is the very beginning of trench warfare, basically the very beginning of the war. Because there wasn't all that bad blood. There wasn't all the propaganda. That was certainly there, but it hadn't been around for years. By the time December 1915 rolls around, it's been since July 1914 they've been at war, and there's been propaganda, and there's been attrition, and there's been casualties, enough bad blood that you probably aren't going to want to do a gift exchange with the Germans. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think it's very important how he talked about how like the warfare actually changed, like disincentivized the soldiers from ever doing this again.
Yes.
That is very interesting. And Patrick, that actually goes very nicely into like what you've talked about, why Johnny can't kill.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the things that jumps out to me the most about this is that the ceasefire talks really start happening after Christmas Eve. And the event on Christmas Eve that seems to me to have charged this situation was the singing of Christmas carols, but also the fact that the Allied forces could see the enemy being human. And it's that humanization, which is the really key part of what allows the ceasefire to happen the next day.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, like you hear your enemy, singing Christmas carols, you know, at first, because remember, days before they were shooting your friends.
Yeah.
Right. And now you see that, oh, wait, these people are just like me, and no matter who started it, you've shot their friends too. And, they're still trying to be, joyous on Christmas. And it's like, oh, maybe these people aren't so different from us after all,
There's also there's something to be said too for the idea that who started it was a Serb in Sarajevo. Like this wasn't the same kind of situation where it was like Germany just invaded for no reason. There was a whole domino effect of things that led to this conflict, and none of the guys on the front really wanted to be there.
Right.
It wasn't it wasn't some. I mean, of course, this is always part of propaganda and stuff, but it didn't come from some weird ultra nationalist place like you hear from World War II.
Also, on that point, a lot of people when people are super into wars and history, World War II is usually generally what most people gravitate towards, and for obvious reasons. I'm definitely not trying to downplay World War II.
Sure,
I've always been almost more fascinated with World War I. Just because it was the start of an entirely new type of warfare on a scale unheard of before. And it was one of the, just the way it was fought was probably one of the most terrifying things a soldier could imagine, right? Because you have the introduction of all these new types of warfare, like tanks, gas warfare, all these new things that were just never really seen before on a wide scale.
You hear it described as the violent birth of the modern world, and I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
And I did want to point out too some of the cynicism of some of these British historians. There was one guy in one of the documentaries I watched who was very careful to talk a lot about how this wasn't personal for them. They were just professionals having a day off. And then they went right back to killing each other. 2-3 days later, they were right back to killing each other, and they didn't really care about this. And this wasn't a human moment. Yeah,
this was that seems like a very cynical take.
It's
for them.
Very cynical.
It's if I remember correctly, I'm not 100% on this, but if I remember correctly, the generals forced the soldiers to shoot back. They actually coerced them to shoot back at the opposing side.
At some places on the front, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, it was different. It sort of spun back up, and I didn't clip this, but there was one guy talking about kind of how the war spun back up along the front after this. Mm-hmm. And in some places, it was a day later, maybe 2 days later, one of your guys gets popped, and it's it's back on.
Right.
And that happened on both sides. In some places, it was because the shelling started. The artillery guys...
Yeah, the shelling.
Yeah, the artillery guys weren't part of the truce. So, the artillery guys were still back behind the line firing shells. So when the shelling starts again, war's back.
Exactly, yeah.
So it started up in different ways along different places. And yeah, in some places, I'm sure they were told, no, you got to get back to fighting. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Which I find to be the more interesting aspect of this, because it seems like if just nobody kills anyone as far as along the front of this war after this event, And in these
Right.
places, again, right, because the front wasn't a uniform thing. It was different in different spots. But in the places where this happens, it seems like if nobody shoots again, like the war's over in that little
There's
chunk
no
of
incentive.
yeah.
There's no incentive once peace has been established at that point. There's no incentive outside, outside influence causing it to happen for them to shoot back at each other again.
Right.
Right. It's like, we've made all these human connections with these people, and now we're just going to shoot at them for just because, that seems highly unlikely to me. And like as you said, like from what I've read, the shellings really like caused it to pop off again, like outside influence, the people who are not a part of this truce instigating more conflict.
Well, to that point, one of the things that kept it going was when they would cycle guys back in to the front. Like you had churn a lot, especially with the
Yes.
British. And so they would pull out the guys who were at the front and bring in fresh reservists or bring in professionals who hadn't been there, regulars who hadn't been up there. And they want to fight. They're going to war.
Right. Yeah. Now, Patrick, we can talk more about like why Johnny can't kill if you want, because like this like heavily ties into like the whole Christmas truce. So what you made this documentary? What is like what's it about? Like the thesis behind it? And, like what is your conclusion that you draw from it, from the information that you compiled?
The conclusion really is that there exists an innate and biological resistance at the heart of man towards taking fellow human life.
Yes. And this is a very like anti-Hobbesian view, because most like if you listen to like a Hobbesian or something, they will tell you that man's inherent nature is brutal and violent and warlike, and that the peaceful cooperation can just not happen spontaneously on its own.
Which is really funny because, there's a few sources for the origin of this thesis. And the first one is empirical. And it came about during World War II. There was this general called General S.L.A. Marshall, and they called him SLAM for short with his initials. And he conducted a study during the war of where he would go around to different units and he would poll them. And the question was, in any engagement with the enemy, how many soldiers in your unit would take any part of that engagement with their rifles? And the answer was really astounding, because it found that only 20% of the men polled, and again, this was a huge survey involving hundreds or thousands of different units, where SLA Marshall, he had like census people go with him and ask this question. And throughout, it was uniform that the firing rate was 20%. And this caused a panic, a huge panic. And the first thing that the U.S. military set out to do after discovering this was to make sure that they got those firing rates up to as close to 100% as they could. And some people contest SLA Marshall's findings, and they say that his methods weren't exactly completely scientific and didn't hold up to certain rigor. And I mean, to that, you talk about exactly what the methods were, saying that, this was a huge sample size that he drew from, and that whether, you could debate the accuracy a little bit, maybe by some percentage points, but 20 is a very low percentage. And it's obvious and very clear, a definitive fact, that the military took it incredibly seriously. And so you see firing rates after that go up. In Korea, they were much higher. And then in Vietnam, they were like 80%. And then now firing rates are very close to 100%.
One of the things you pointed out in your documentary that I found so fascinating was the kill rate between soldiers in the Civil War, I believe, based on the distance they were from the enemy. And I think you said, I don't remember the exact percentages, but essentially it was the closer they were, the more they missed the shot. And the farther they were, the more accurate, like the more likely they were to actually hit the target and kill them. Something to that.
Well, so I could read this here. So the this all comes from Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who is an Army Ranger. He actually, after he retired, he started doing these consulting services, teaching, because he identified this resistance to killing. And what he does with his career is try to condition people out of that so they can kill without mercy.
Oh, right. So he's saying, like, yeah, this happened, but it's a bad thing.
And I mean, I guess his view is a little bit more nuanced, because I mean, he's been saying that, like, he goes around to police departments and teaches this warrior methodology.
I've seen videos of this, I think. Yeah.
I hate it.
He calls it killology.
Oh, of course.
Study of killing. And he said outrageous things like, you know, the night after killing someone, you'll have the best sex of your life. He said shit like that.
Oh my God.
So
it sounds a lot like rationalizing your own sociopathy, but okay.
Well, his view of the world is that, well, you know, there's sheepdogs and there's the sheep, and we need sheepdogs that, you know, will protect the sheep, and to protect our society, we need people that we designate to go out and kill. And a lot, to be fair, a lot of what he talks about is this Jungian thing where, you know, inside of us is a monster, and we need to learn how to tame the monster. So you view the darkest side of yourself when you go out and you kill in war. But part of what Grossman's thing is, well, how do we take that soldier back and reintegrate them and make them healthy? How do you
put that back in the box?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And another thing I wanted to say before I forget, and then I'll respond to your question, Ace. I'm sorry for the
No, you're fine.
sidetrack, but this is very important because we were talking about Hobbes and man's inherent, the way that man is inherently. One thing that Grossman talks about is how throughout the animal kingdom, what you don't see are species killing their own, not on widespread levels.
Right.
And in some sense, that makes man very unique. Not that it doesn't exist at all in nature, but the general frame is that species don't go around killing wholesale.
Not in widespread warfare against each other.
Yeah. Now there might be, you know, isolated incidents of killing and mate competition or something like that. But generally speaking, when there is competition between intraspecies competition, you would have, like, when two deer spar back and forth, when the bucks go after each other during the rut, they fight each other and their horns lock and they push each other around, and they do this to exhaustion. And at some point, or lions do this too, at some point, one is the victor and one loses. And when that one loses, they show their belly. They become vulnerable. And that is the sign for the victor to stop. The victor does not kill.
Right.
And so it's really about, you know, there's in interspecies fighting, there's the fight or flight response. While Dave Grossman, he posits that when you're intraspecies fighting, there's posturing, there's fighting, there's flight, and there's submission. And so posturing is a lot of what, and this is how it ties into this firing study that Ace was talking about. Posturing is a lot of what warfare is. And that was a lot of, and you can see this throughout history too, with the uniforms, with the plumes on people's hats, going back, you know, their helmets going back to ancient times, the hoplites.
That's all the Stahlhelm, right? Was it the Stahlhelm that had the, or am I thinking of the pickle helm that had the spike on the middle of it? The Germans wore.
Making yourself appear bigger and appear more ruthless than you actually are is a big part of it. But specifically as it relates to the firing rates, Grossman has this to say, right? So, for instance, this is my article citing Grossman. I write, for instance, Grossman recites a well-documented study of Prussian infantry accuracy and firing rates. This study found that using smoothbore muskets, Prussian infantry scored 25% hits at 225 yards, 40% hits at 150 yards, and 60% hits at 75 yards when firing at a 100-foot by 6-foot target. So with those firing rates, Grossman concludes, thus at 75 yards, A 200-man regiment should be able to hit as many as 120 enemy soldiers in the first volley. If 4 shots were fired each minute, a regiment could potentially kill or wound as many as 450 enemy soldiers in the first minute of combat. So I write further, with these established accuracy numbers, casualty rates in that era should have been near 100%, given that, for instance, the average American Civil War engagement took place at 30 yards. So conversely, death rates in that war, the Civil War, were as low as 1 to 2 men per minute, and engagements lasted for hours. So where were all these rounds going if we know that accuracy is very high in this era? Where are these rounds going?
Yeah.
So that would reflect SLA Marshall's results, basically that only 20% of men actually fired their weapon in combat. But when you have line combat like this kind of taking place in the American Civil War and a bit earlier, you do have more accountability because you're very close to your comrades. Mm-hmm. So what would happen in those conflicts would be, you'd have people who faked firing, but you would also have people just aiming above the enemy.
Firing into the air.
Posturing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously the idea is that because they're closer, they can see the other person's face, right? That's kind of like, and therefore they're less likely, because if you can see this other person is just another human versus another monster, right? And this is often what you get in like military conditioning and warfare, is you have to demonize the enemy to a point where they're practically not human, or they're like a demon wearing a human skin, and that's how you have to approach the enemy.
In dehumanization is a big part of it. Also, conditioning is a big part of it. This idea of, and this is how the U.S. military specifically got those firing rates up, is that they hijacked human psychology and used, I don't know, I'm not a psychology person, so I don't know if it's Skinnerian or Pavlovian conditioning, where I know Pavlov is where there's a stimulus and there's a reaction. And so what they did is they conditioned soldiers in something called reflexive fire training, where when you are trained in the U.S. military, it's not always like this when you have fire training, but part of the training is to go on a firing range and engage targets as they pop up. So they train you that you put your crosshairs on basically a target that pops up from the ground, and the target is usually in a human silhouette. And you're supposed to immediately draw on it and squeeze the trigger. And if they train you to do that, then when you're in combat, and part of this is video games too, is that we basically, all of our young men who play Call of Duty in the world are they're being conditioned to squeeze the trigger as soon as the target presents itself.
Right.
And it's not that Call of Duty causes violence, but it lowers your inhibitions. You
might be more conditioned for that kind of response. It's one of those things that
when you're in the situation,
right? I had a friend,
and they're also giving rewards for people who do well in the military, who are proficient at this. So that's another a carrot on the stick type thing, where it's like, if you do this, you'll be rewarded in some capacity.
And I was talking to Biting the Bullet guys about this, and we were talking about their training in the Marine Corps and how there's a rifleman ribbon that you get, or there's a citation, not a citation. What do they call that?
Commendation.
A commendation that you get for being proficient in your rifleman training. And if you don't have that, it's incredibly embarrassing. From what I understand. So.
The rifleman and marksmanship ribbons, those kinds of things. And there's also, I had a buddy who was a Marine, and I was talking to him. He got medically discharged after being in a car accident. And I was talking to him about sort of when my brother was actually, getting ready to join. And I was talking to my friend who was a Marine, and he said, "Your brother's going to hate it." And I said, "Well, why do you think that?" And he said, "Because," he said, "just as an example," he says, I never once had like a racist thought, like a real like racist thought about anybody. And he says, the Marines taught me to be racist. I learned how to be racist in the Marines. Particularly toward Arabs or people who look like Arabs. but also just in a general sense, I learned racism from the military. And that kind of blew my hair back a little bit because I was like, of course they do that. They have to.
It's also, to your point, of course, Patrick, everyone has this idea, and I think I guess they learn it from school, like in civics or whatever, but this idea that man has this inherent nature that is brutal and violent. And again, we're not saying, like for listeners, we're not saying that these traits don't exist within humans, but it's not a total flat universal thing among humanity itself. But it seems very intuitive to your point that if man was truly like this at base, at the default, why would this conditioning be necessary in the first place? Why would the military have to condition all these soldiers or would-be soldiers to act like this beforehand if it wasn't already the default?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that evidence exists in abundance. I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory or, some kind of misunderstanding of military doctrine. I think this is something they really have grappled with and had actual sit down, talks about and have planned out in detail.
Yes.
Maybe they don't recognize exactly what it is in these bare terms per se, but to them, it's just a matter of like, well, firing rates are down and we got to get them up. We need fire superiority.
Right.
And how do we do that? I actually have, on my bookshelf here, I have one of the original SLA Marshall study. It's called Men Against Fire. It was published. Now, I don't know if it's a first edition, but it's an old book. So, and some military, actually, there's someone gifted it to someone else and wrote inside the front cover, and they were military people. So I wonder, how special that is. But
yeah.
So another part of this too is, you were talking about racism, and some of it is, I included in my documentary, are these slogans that are taught at basic training, where your drill instructor would make you have these chants like, ooh, I'm going to slap your mama. Ooh, I'm going to slap your daddy. Like, beat him up, or something like that. And there's others like singing songs about napalm sticking to kids and shouting things like kill, kill, kill when you stab the bayonet into the dummy, and doing things like that.
What makes the grass grow?
Yeah, what makes the green grass grow? Blood, Sergeant, blood. Blood makes the green grass grow. So stuff like that. And I have read that they're trying to phase that out of official doctrine in the military. But the Marines that I've talked to has said that, off the record, we sang those songs.
Absolutely.
Sticking to kids and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Another part about it is diffusion of responsibility or perceived responsibility. Yes. And I think that's really important as we get into the era of mechanized warfare.
Absolutely.
And everyone knows that it's the artillery that takes the most lives in combat like this, in bombing campaigns. And we see this even now in Ukraine. It's the artillery that causes most of the casualties. And part of that is Grossman talks about as these team operated weapons that if you are a part of a team operating a weapon, in your mind, you justify this diffusion of responsibility. It's the same thing as like firing squads where they'll line up 5 people to shoot at one person and they'll give 2 people the bullet.
Right.
Or loaded weapons. Or like if you're part of an artillery piece and you're just the guy that's swabbing down the bore in between shots, do you really view yourself as being responsible for all the deaths? Whereas if you're the guy pulling the lanyard, or if you're the pilot in the Enola Gay, or you're the waist gunner in the Enola Gay, and you probably justify it by a few things, saying that, well, we have to prevent, a land invasion of Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And people have killed so many of our guys, and I'm protecting everybody back home. That's part of it. But the other part about it is that if you're flying at 30,000 feet in the Enola Gay, and you press a button or you give the signal to the bomb bay operator to drop the bomb, you're not there at ground zero watching the bomb fall and seeing people being eviscerated. You're not even there walking the rubble after that happens.
Yeah.
You might not even have viewed the pictures.
Right.
You might have specifically avoided that.
Yeah. The way you talked about dividing the responsibility, it's very much akin to the division of labor in the production of goods, right? So if you make something on your own, right, it's much more costly, but you feel responsible for it at the very end, right? Because you put theoretically you put every piece together, you can say that's your own. If you're in a car assembly factory and your job is you make this one cog that goes into this bigger piece that goes into an even bigger construction, you are not necessarily going to feel responsible for the car itself, right? You know what I mean? You're not going to feel responsible for the whole thing. So just like the division of labor in the production of goods lowers people's feeling of responsibility for the final product, it does the exact same thing in the production of bads. Well, it is very insidious.
Is this really an argument for capitalism?
Well, yeah. That is a good point. Now that you said that, but it's it can be used in very insidious ways if you divide responsibility for moral wrongs.
Well, what you're really doing is you're alienating people from their labor.
Oh, right, exactly. Yeah.
It's kind of the same idea, though. I mean, we saw that if you watched the WikiLeaks video that really popped WikiLeaks off, the video of the
collateral murder.
Yes, the collateral murder video. That I think fucked me up for life. I saw it when I was 14.
I was one of those sick kids where maybe I don't know if I'm a sociopath or what, but I really enjoy watching watch people die.
Live leak. It was live leak videos where somebody gets sucked into a loom or some shit. Yeah, those are fucked, but it's weirdly fascinating. I'm with you.
Yeah. So you have all these things kind of coming together: the diffusion of responsibility, the dehumanization, and the social pressure too of where. Throughout history, Grossman would talk about how the most effective military units were the ones, generally speaking, who figured out how to deal and get rid of this inhibition to killing.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope I'm using that word inhibition correctly.
Yes.
Yeah. But so the Romans would have special training where they would teach all their soldiers to stab with their swords instead of slashing, because a slash is usually just a superficial wound, but a stab, it doesn't have to be very deep, but it's generally lethal if you get it in the right spot. Mm-hmm. And there's things like the hoplites where they would be in their what is the name of that formation?
The phalanx.
The phalanx formation. Thank you. Where they would work together as a team, and they would have a CO or a supervisor that was very close. And so you're getting the diffusion of responsibility, and you're getting the social pressure of having your comrades right next to you and your officer close by to hold you accountable.
To your point, I'm sorry, Ace, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say, now, I don't know how much of this is just me reading into it too much. And truthfully, I don't think there's a way for me to know. But certainly with the phalanx formation, so if anyone who doesn't know what a phalanx formation is, it's essentially a wall of shields that can essentially protect your back line and your front line in every conceivable position, from infantry. And you have soldiers with spears as well as shields, right? So I'm interested whether the phalanx position had and the formation of it had anything to do with lowering the potential visibility and direct physical contact with killing the other soldiers. Now, maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Obviously, it is strategically better than most formations at that time. But I wonder if there was also a component where it was easier to kill them because the spears were longer, and the shields can block the view of the soldiers as well. So
stay behind your shield and thrust your spear, and you just turn all your guys into a pincushion. Like you turn your whole unit into something that looks like a pincushion.
I'm not saying that's why, but I think it's a possibility.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, specifically with the spear, and not just the spear, but also bows and arrows really lengthen the killing distance, because that's another factor in it. But the spear itself was incredibly effective, not because it was the superior weapon per se, but the distance between. I mean, how intimate is it to stab a piece of metal into another person's chest,
especially when you're hiding behind a shield, mostly, right? Too, and you're blocking view.
Well, I mean, I'm even talking
just
about,
in a general sense.
Just a spear.
You walk up to someone, you take your buck knife and you drive it into their chest. You look into their eyes as the life runs out of them. I mean, that
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
The psychology of that you even see in true crime stuff, because detectives and detectives and policemen will go through and talk about profiling serial killers, and they talk about how stabbing someone in the chest, or suffocating someone, wrapping your hands around someone's throat and squeezing the life out of them for minutes at a time really goes towards the depravity of the killer.
Yes. Right? You have to be determined to do that.
These methods matter.
Yeah.
Right.
And that leads me to another really important thing about this whole process is the psychology itself of killing and taking another life. So usually when you look through just because there is a resistance towards taking human life doesn't mean that people don't overcome that resistance.
Right.
And you see that a lot, especially when soldiers finally do their job after, months and months, maybe years of training. They don't get an opportunity to be in combat. They get in the situation, they have a hostile, they pull up a bead on them and they blow them away, right? They feel contrarily, they feel exuberation. They get this intense high exhilaration. They get compliments from their peers, get some, that kind of Marine Corps attitude. You get the jokes and the bravado. But after that, there is a disgust when it really sets in. And I'm not saying this happens in every case, because there is a population of society that are sociopaths and psychopaths, people that don't have these inhibitions. But for most people, after you kill someone else, after the high wears off, you feel revulsion. And sometimes sometimes it doesn't take very long to feel this, but oftentimes you will have accounts of people becoming physically ill and vomiting after they kill someone else and realize what they've done.
Yep.
And it's very intense, and it leads to this whole concept of moral injury, which is something that is separate. So I've talked to Lori Calhoun, who is a senior fellow at the Libertarian Institute, and she has real academic credentials, and she has written books about this. The killing, We Kill Because We Can is her book. From, I think, something about it focuses on drone warfare. And she has corrected me to say that PTSD and moral injury are not completely separate things, that they usually coexist. But my understanding, and I need to have a conversation with her about this where we really get down to it. But my initial understanding from reading What Have We Done, which is a book specifically about moral injury in the terror wars. But my understanding is that moral injury is a emotional reaction, and that PTSD is a physiological reaction. And that PTSD would be the engagement of your fight or flight response because of danger or a stimulus. And moral injury is the invisible wounds, the psychic injury that is inflicted on a soldier. Feelings of basically moral injury is that as humans, we all believe, generally speaking, that the world is a good place where good people exist and good things are supposed to happen to us. And we are supposed to do good things. Of course, this is not in every case, but so when you do things or see things done to people that does not comport with that general rule that we grow up with and the reality that we are raised to believe, most of us through our life, that the world is a good place where we're supposed to do good things and good things are supposed to happen to people, to see things like a child being blown into pieces, or to yourself kill a child, or for your buddy to helplessly die while you sit and watch without being able to do anything about it, it fractures your soul and basically destroys you emotionally to the point where you can't rectify your prior self with your experiences.
Right.
And I mean, most people, unless you're like born into like a war zone or something like that, right? Most people regard war as a notable thing and not the default, right? Like when war happens, it's some horrible event. It's not taken as, oh yeah, this is just what happens, right? So I think that goes to your point that, yeah, people generally view, like whether they admit it or not, they have this at least subconscious understanding that, the world is generally a good place. People are generally at least not evil, at the very least, and that these things should not happen generally when they happen to them, at least.
Yeah. So, well, some people will go around, and cynically just say like, well, mankind is inherently evil and people suck or whatever. But when you walk down the street, the guy next to you doesn't stab you in the chest because you
don't think, oh, well, this is just what happens,
Right. Yeah. And there's nothing you can do about it because that people are just evil and that's the way it
That's what I was going to say. Even if people say they don't believe it, everybody lives as if they do.
Right.
Everybody lives as if they do believe that the world is a generally safe and fine place and most people are not out to kill you. Like that's how we live. And I have yet to see, even from people who would pronounce that mankind is evil and all this other stuff, they don't live like that.
And this is the weird thing, the disgusting thing about war and war making is that there is this belief that war is this completely separate thing.
Yes.
Where the regular rules of morality do not apply.
Yeah. It's like, oh, if I went into a shopping mall and there was like some shooter running through the shopping mall and I just took my machine gun and just shot shots into everyone in the mall to stop that killer, everyone would view me as a murderer. Like everyone. But if you go and you drop a bomb onto a wedding because you think a terrorist might be there, oh, well, that's just foreign policy. That's just
we have collateral damage, and this comes up every time. Yeah. This comes up every time Ace stirs the Hiroshima and Nagasaki pot, which he likes to do, and I find it very entertaining. Every time that happens, there's a cadre of people who have taken that stance that war is a universe unto itself, wherein, like you said, Patrick, the normal rules of morality simply don't apply. And humans don't work like that.
Right.
It's like the reason they believe that, the reason a person believes that, and this is my opinion, the reason they believe that is because they have to believe it for their own sanity. Yes. If they don't believe that for their own sanity, then they will not be able to look upon the horror of what it actually is. So it's almost like a defense mechanism. They have to believe this because the reality is too horrifying to look at, honestly.
Especially if they served.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
This is one of the things, actually, I was going to mention that there's a school of historical thought, and I'm not a historian. I don't know enough about historians, but I know that there is a school of historical sort of military historians whose position is that, especially in the era of hand-to-hand fighting, ancient warfare, and historic warfare, that before gunpowder, when everyone's fighting with sticks that are sharp, basically, in whatever form that takes, be it a sword or whatever, when everyone's fighting with sticks that are sharp, this school of historical thought basically says these engagements in this era were not big mythical conflagrations. They were very short. And your whichever side would rout quickly. And these engagements, if you had two lines that clashed, the engagement would be lucky to last a minute and a half, 2 minutes before somebody routed. And of course, this changes depending upon the size of the armies and things. But before, very quickly, someone would rout. And you point out as well in the documentary that the rout is where most of the casualties occur, is in the rout. Whichever side has their backs turned, that's when they take the most casualties.
Right. Yeah. And there's some quotes in Dave Grossman's book, and I don't know exactly who he's quoting, but basically saying that before mechanized warfare, the era of gunpowder, medieval battles were no more dangerous than a game of football or something.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what that school of historians sort of thinks, is that you might clash, two armies might clash, but as soon as everyone kind of realizes what the fuck they're doing, somebody runs away.
Right. And also, at least in a lot of medieval battles, not everyone, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them, it would be two armies going into an abandoned field and fighting each other. Right. It's not like warfare in the middle of some cosmopolitan center or something like that with a bunch of civilians in the middle. Now, obviously, there were obviously civilian deaths and casualties and stuff like that in medieval times as well, but it was much less, much fewer casualties.
Well, that also would have happened after you won. Like you win a siege battle and you sack the town. Like that's where your casualties from civilians come in.
Right.
But I find it interesting. You talked about the difference between guys that serve and guys that don't, and closing that box. And there's an interesting thing where both of my grandfathers were in the military during Vietnam. One of them actually went to Vietnam, and the other one was getting ready to go when Vietnam ended. And of course, my grandfather, who was actually in Vietnam, I don't know how much of his issues is from that and how much of it is just his personality, but he's not a well man. My other grandfather, who did not fight, wasn't a particularly well man either. And this is in part exemplified in a story that I was told by my grandfather, my grandmother, his wife. She woke him one time. He was sleeping. And he was, I can't remember why exactly she was waking him up. It could have been that it was the morning. But she was trying to wake him up, and he tackled her and started choking her. And this was not long after he had gotten back from, I believe he was staging in Germany before going to Vietnam. And this was not long after he had gotten back, right after the end of the war. And that story to me always kind of exemplified this idea of like trying to put that, kind of how you described the, how do you fix this person who you've taught to be a monster? How do you put that back in the box? And even if they didn't see battle, you've still opened that part of them.
Right. And I think this is partially explained by my interview with Typo from Biting the Bullet, where we talked about his experience and just how even for vets who don't see active duty, the suicide rates are still high, very high.
Yeah.
And it seems like Typo was talking about how they just completely deconstruct you as a person and they build you back up in their vision. Like they melt you down and put you in a different mold and inject you in a different mold. And that process, something gets broken sometimes in the middle. And for some people, there's all types of people that go into the military, but some of them are not well to begin with. And it seems like maybe some of them are extra vulnerable to breaking. They bend until they break. Whereas, it's not easy for even most people to go into the military and be stationed. And, Typo was stationed in Okinawa. And even there, he's talked about incredible mental health struggles.
Yes.
So
yeah, it's my I don't want to say too much. I've got family in Okinawa stationed, and it's not easy. It's not easy to be in the military on its own. It's especially not easy to be like self-aware and to be in the military, like to be a self-aware person in that situation. I think that's one of the things they try to do is get you to turn that part of yourself off. That part of yourself that is self-aware and that is like self-critical and thinks about things. I really think they try hard to turn that part off because it clashes so hard with what they want you to be.
Part of it might also just be that Okinawa is a horrible place to be stationed. I don't know. Maybe the natives are so pissed off that
they
we're there.
Hate it. They hate it. And honestly, for good reason.
Maybe there's some kind of voodoo juju going on there.
Yeah. But I think it's probably more universal than that. I think it's probably, anyone who goes through the experience of being part of that, brotherhood, if you will, where you go through these experiences where, like you said, they try to break you down and build you back up in their image. And it's I think, well, just like you said, I think it can break something inside of somebody where they're just not even not the same, actively worse off.
Yeah.
Than they were before.
Well, one other thing I wanted to touch on too was just war theory. And
yes,
it's another really fun kind of thing to get into that not a lot of people talk about. You would think that just like the idea of a just war. Now, I'm of my opinion, and I depart from Rothbard on this. Is that my opinion is that there is no such thing as just war, and there never will be.
I agree with that.
Just war. But you would think that the idea of a just war would be something that is more anti-war, right? That anti-war, defensive, right? Well, just war theory, like neoconservatives are just war theorists. And I think some realists are just war theorists. So just the idea, and I guess it depends on what your definition of a just war is. Of course, from a Rothbardian point of view, a purely defensive war would be a just war. I don't believe that a just war, because I think just war theory has done more to excuse wars of aggression.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like how, sometimes, oftentimes what states will do is when they develop a constitution, states will input, like justified ways states can aggress into their constitution. And then they say, look, this is the justified aggression we get to do.
Yes.
It's kind of like that, and same with just war theory. It's like, well, a lot of war is bad, but when it fits this criteria, then it's good.
And those criteria will always bend to fit whoever's advancing the argument.
That's right.
Yeah. There's a to your point about just wars, though. I think socially, I think society at large, or at least people generally, agree more with Rothbard. The idea that if you're in a defensive posture, if you've been attacked, you are free to attack. For example, even at the scale of states, which is where the logic kind of starts to break down. But the idea that, and I've made this point on the show before, the idea that the draft was not used in World War II because we didn't have enough guys. The draft was used in World War II. If you actually read the executive order, the draft was utilized because we had too many volunteers. And some people have found sources indicating that there was fear the economy would fucking collapse because there were too many people signing up to join after Pearl Harbor. And this also follows the executive order, and I forget the number for it, but it's in the sources of one of our episodes. The executive order is specifically outlaws and bans volunteering. So I say that all that to say, I think society at large kind of agrees that if it's defensive, I'm going to show up. You know what I mean? At least that's what those numbers would imply. And I tend to agree with you that warfare qua warfare is not ever just. But I think society at large feeling defensive will come out for it. And I think that's also part of the problem we have now is that we haven't had a quote unquote just war in a very, very, very long time. And people, I think, have realized that.
Well, that's part of what I was saying about this elastic definition of what a defensive war is. And I think your point about society, viewing a defensive war as being just is astute. But what is your definition of a defensive war?
Exactly.
We got to fight them over there so we don't fight them here. Is it
right? Right.
Or well, the Japanese, quote unquote, the Japanese attacked us. So when we dropped the atom bombs, we were just being defensive. We were just responding to their attack.
That's
when the little baby in Nagasaki gets evaporated, we were just defending ourselves.
Right. That's why I say the logic at the scale of nation states, the logic of defense starts to fall apart. But
or Dean, even to your point, and you'll appreciate this, is defense of yourself and defense of others.
Right? Exactly.
So, like, when we sail our warships through the South China Sea, we're really defending the rules-based order of the world. Free trade.
The liberal world order.
The liberal rules-based world order.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's
it falls apart at that scale. And not to interrupt, I'm sorry, Ace, but
no, you're fine. Go ahead.
There is in that broad kind of sense, the United States, like if you try to, like for example, the United States was hungry for war after 9/11. There were very few voices, and those voices were loud and they were acknowledged, but there were very few voices that thought Iraq was a bad idea at the time. Very few voices in the media. I think The Daily Show might have been one of the only places you could get that. The idea that the Iraq War was a bad idea. That and some celebrities. But outside of that, in the immediate aftermath, right, of 9/11, it was very much, I would posit that the cultural mood, again, from what I've read of the cultural mood after Pearl Harbor, was very similar. Where it's like, no, we have to go kill the guys that did this. And I think that is a reasonable response. To say, this is, they're actively committing hostilities against the nation in which I live, and thus implying they're going to commit hostilities against me, and so we need to go get those guys before they do anything. But I think the key component is those guys. So whoever says it was them, it's like, okay, let's go get him. And it turns out, no, that he was pointing at Iraq. Oops.
It's very much like every single time someone talks about this, and this is the same when even if it's like, no matter what war, I find people have this same like mental block, whether it be World War II with like America versus Japan, or after 9/11, Afghanistan and Iraq. They're like, well, they attacked us. Well, wait a minute, who is they?
Yes.
Well, when you say that sentence, that is Atlas lifting the world. That is how much that they is carrying your argument.
I'll even accept in that context. I'll even accept us, because the implication is they wouldn't have cared if you were one of the guys on that ship, right? So I'll even take us, but when needs to be very specific.
Yeah, like the amount of people who will just look at conflicts like international conflicts between two countries as just like two nodes on a map. And there are no other players in the field there. And whether the player and like citizens are just merely, cells of the country, and they're, when I hear people say that, it is hard for me to wrap my mind around how they can actually believe that. Like it's genuinely like difficult for me to get inside their head and imagine how they can like look at pictures of a child being killed by a drone strike and think, well, they were just a part of the, foreign country we were at war with. So, it's what happens.
So part of my thing about believing there are no just wars.
Mm-hmm.
So say that, tomorrow those fucking fibs decide to march over the border from their shithole state, Illinois, come north into Wisconsin. Let them have Madison and Milwaukee, but once they get north of Highway 29, gloves are off, right? And I'm sitting with my granddaddy's old M1 Grand, and there's explosions going on, and we're fighting them. Even that, to me, would be an unjust war, completely unprovoked. Those fibs come up north, right? Completely unprovoked. To me, that still is not. I am not a just actor in that situation, because any war, say that I'm shooting at a fib and there's a stray bullet that goes and hits a child.
Yes.
Right? Any of those fights, of course, you could say that the fibs instigated it, right?
Sure.
But in reality, it would be my finger pulling the trigger and a bullet hitting a child.
Right.
And I'm not gonna, I'm not pure to the point where, of course, ideally there would be no war ever, right? But that is a fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not pure to the point where I'm going to sit here and condemn someone for, like, just take your average Ukrainian who's fighting on the ground against Russia right now.
Right.
I have my feelings about U.S. involvement in prolonging the war and things I've talked about ad nauseum on my show. But that person who honestly believes that they're defending their neighbors and their soil from aggression, from actual aggression.
Yeah.
Am I going to sit here and moralize to them and lecture them about how immoral that they are? No, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
Well, it's the same kind of logic. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying. My thing is, like, I think, like, well, each person has the right to defend themselves in a conflict when they've been initiated upon. But I also believe you were also responsible for any harm you cause to a third party in defense of, when you're acting in defense.
Right.
So that to me is how I kind of like square that. Like,
and it's unavoidable in a war.
Yes, in a war. So if you're in a situation where it's unavoidable, where you feel like, oh, I'm going to, like, harm a bunch of innocent people, yeah, I would be morally opposed to that as well. So yeah, I do agree with you that I think, like, realistically, what war is realistically, I don't think there is a just war realistically.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, to your point, Patrick, it's one of those things, it's kind of like, well, I mean, like you said, the Ukrainian who honestly believes and I mean, in a lot of cases probably honestly is defending their own home from an aggressive act by a foreign party or a third party. Like, that's it's difficult to moralize to that person in the same way that if you have two people, and I liken it to this because I'm familiar with it, not because I'm being a nerd. If you have two people aiming a gun at each other, each thinking that they're acting in self-defense, as far as at least we make allowances for, they are. They're both acting in self-defense. Even if they're both wrong, it's the subjective belief that you're in danger and you have to fight for yourself that we respect. And I think that is sort of the same thing that you're describing, this idea that, like, I can't sit here and condemn somebody who honestly believes that they're defending their home and their family from an aggressor. It's just, you really can't. But at the same time, I think it is fair to say that, especially on the scale of nation states and these large groups of actors like this, the self-defense logic breaks down as soon as the government is directing teams of people to go kill each other. You know what I mean? Like, even if you wanted to apply self-defense logic to your fib scenario, even if you wanted to apply self-defense logic to that, to some extent, you maybe could. They're coming to take my house. So, okay, so maybe you have to fight those guys. But when it's a government directing a bunch of people to go kill one another, there's no defensive action there. You know what I mean? Right.
And where I have a little less sympathy is when, farm boys around here, whoever joins up in the military and then gets shipped out to Iraq or Afghanistan. And, of course, subjectively, they probably believe that they're protecting us back home and doing all those things. Now, I'm not going to moralize or condemn them because, A, it's not productive, and B, just adding more animosity to an already fucked up situation is not the person that I am or the person I want to be. I want to be
not particularly helpful.
You come with healing, but at the same time, I can sit here and say that that's wrong.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Very nuanced thing.
Yeah. And it is one of those, especially in, for example, just like that, in the wake of 9/11, it's like all the people joining up to go get the guys that did that. I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing for a person to feel. But it's
a very honorable sentiment,
right? Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it allows for that sentiment to be hijacked and used by bad actors to go attack Iraq. Like it allows for that, and that to me is the core of the problem. At least with regard to war currently.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, fib means fucking Illinois bastard.
Right.
I kid. I'm not one of those people that has a real rivalry between states. Like,
no, it's fun to cosplay those kinds of things though. It's very fun.
Yeah. No, it is.
Yeah.
Like for people who get really, really into like, I don't know, sports or I'm not a sports ball, you like sports kind of person, but I do know people who are from Minnesotans who really hate Iowa for no reason, and they like bring it up all the time, and it's just so fucking annoying. Like, I don't feel like those people, you know?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because I feel like so going back to what you guys were saying a second ago about like how this it's a very understandable emotion to feel, right? After you feel attacked, you want to go stop these people. But I think as you were saying just a second ago too. This can get hijacked in very nefarious ways. And if you don't have a clear idea of who the enemy is, and even more so than that, if you have no care for the people you harm along the way in trying to pursue justice to get these people, then you yourself are going to become an aggressor, just like what was done unto you. Right. Like, one of my favorite things Ron Paul ever did, one of my favorite arguments that he would pull out every single time in regards to foreign policy was, let's imagine if it was China or Russia or something doing what we're doing to Iraq or Afghanistan. If, let's say, a group of people in America attacked China or Russia, and then Russia or China came over here and started rolling tanks down your street, or putting up roadblocks and checkpoints, or bombing places in your city because you think there might be some terrorist inside, and at a wedding or like in some establishment somewhere, and they were just doing this and they were just justifying it. You would feel very upset. Yeah. Just so when people deny blowback theory, when people are mad about 9/11, they are using what blowback theory is saying to justify going over there to attack them. So it's just this super like backwards argument.
It's even like, well, imagine that a bunch of like Brits and South Africans and Australians got together to form a terrorist group. Yeah. And they bombed China and then hid out in caves in Colorado. Yeah. And China used that excuse to occupy our country for 20 years.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't.
After they had left, after the Brits had left Colorado.
Yeah. And they're still hanging around. They're still fighting a war against an invisible enemy with no real, and killing a lot of civilians along the way. It's
it'd be like that movie, was it Red Dawn? That's how everyone envisions themselves if China like invades or whatever, It's like, that is the animosity. Now, just apply that to how Iraqis feel or Afghanis feel in their own respective countries to what the U.S. is doing. That's how they feel.
Yeah. I've heard Scott Horton make that point about with regard to Afghanistan in particular. About like, what would you do if Russia started rolling tanks through Texas? Texans would not be happy.
Welcome to the portion of the show where I tell you how you can help support this content. The best way to do that, guys, is to go to libertyweekly.club. Yes, I haven't changed the URL yet, but this is my membership website that also functions as a newsletter. So if you go to that website, libertyweekly.club, hit the subscribe button in the upper right-hand corner, and you can subscribe for the free newsletter, and I send out a lot of free content. However, there is a section in those free emails that is premium. And that premium section includes early access to my episodes, access to bonus episodes, and preprints of my articles before they're published at the Libertarian Institute or other outlets. So again, go to the website, hit subscribe in the top right-hand corner, and sign up for that email list. You go through the page here and you can see all the content that I've set out in the past. There's a whole bunch of it, guys, and you get access to those previous emails that have gone out as well. Another way to help support me is to go to vitaldescent.com/Stitch Fix and sign up through my link there. You'll get $25 off your first order, and I will also get a $25 credit. Guys, I use this to buy my wardrobe. I'm a father of two. I have my own business. I do this, and I don't have time to go shopping. Can't haul the wife and kids around to have a leisurely shop for myself to pick these clothes. So what Stitch Fix does is that they pick the clothes for you. They send them to you in fixes, and it's really awesome stuff. These are all the pieces that I personally have bought myself. There's a lot of work stuff in there, but there's also casual stuff. I got an awesome plaid shirt that's in there, a flannel, really love that. I got this really cool sweatshirt. I got these awesome boots and a nice windbreaker, really good stuff. So go on over to vitaldescent.com/Stitch Fix. You can also get Vital Descent, really hard not to say Liberty Weekly, Vital Descent merchandise with the cool, awesome new logo from Mises Pieces. You can get all these kinds of things, all this merch. You got coffee cups, pint glasses, sweatshirts, premium t-shirts, premium sweatshirts, all that good stuff there at vitaldescent.com/merch. Also, guys, I started a TikTok channel, and I think that'll be really cool, trying to get more eyeballs on this content and more views. You can see it's already garnering a bunch of views, where I do anti-war cartoon reviews and a lot of cool stuff there. So vitaldescent.com/TikTok is where you can find me. My handle is at @PatMcFarlane_, the same as my Twitter handle. Okay, guys, that's about it. Check out those things. Please help support this content. Help me pay my producer and make the show better for you guys. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so people don't like killing other people. That's the point of this episode.
Yeah. So Patrick, if you want to give a quick rundown of your documentary, Why Johnny Can't Kill, and then we can plug and get out of here if you want.
Yeah. So Why Can't Johnny Kill?
Why Can't Johnny Kill? Yeah.
Well, yeah. It was actually the second one that I've done about this topic. I was playing around with video editing software. The first one actually is Blood Makes the Green Grass Grow. And I'm showing this on the camera, but it's not part of the show. But my buddy Keith Knight a long time ago printed out this comment from James Corbett saying, "Excellent work, Patrick," and he framed it for me. So
that's very nice.
I have it sitting on my desk, and so I think of my friend Keith. So, yeah, basically in that documentary, I go through, and it's produced pretty well. It's maybe the best produced thing that I've put out video.
It's very good. It's very good.
Yeah, well, thank you. And so it goes through a lot of the high points of what we discussed here, but it has video clips in it from these actual things that take place in military training. And in it, at the end, I got a little artsy, and I put in some testimony from the Winter Soldier sessions where Afghanistan war veterans talk about their war crimes.
Absolutely heartrending stuff.
Yeah.
And the whole video is just horrible. And actually Adam Kokesh testified at this year.
Yeah, he was there. That's right.
Yeah. So he talked about his time in Fallujah, and then at the end I show the collateral murder video, and I get a little more artsy, because the things that they're saying to each other during that video are just kind of bone chilling. So,
and very emblematic of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So
and like, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, so the overall thesis or conclusion of the documentary is that human beings, while there are tendencies obviously to be violent, we see that all through history. There's not a universal innate tendency that many people assume that humans have, that we're just innately warlike and we innately like killing other people. Would that be a correct summation?
Yeah, in another part of that is that obviously the conditioning has to happen to grease the skids, and people need to be put in situations where they are made to kill each other.
Yes, right. And it's not emphasized as much, but there is a sort of a sub point that I picked up on that I really liked, which is that when you put somebody in that situation, you cause them harm. There's a you talk about moral injury in the piece, and it is putting people in that situation is inherently inhumane. And
yes. And, circling back one more time to the very beginning of the show, I think it's so heroic about the Christmas truce of World War I that these men, after being in battle against each other, decided we're going to say no for today, and we're going to act like civilized people and spend Christmas together and bury the dead who they had lost previously. I think it's one of the most heroic moments in wars of all war stories. One of the most, for me personally, heroic things.
There was the mother of a Vietnam protester who, conscientious objector who was imprisoned, and she wrote a piece, an op-ed in the newspaper, and I think the title of it was, "What if they held the war and nobody came?"
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it reminds me just of that. It's what if everyone just said no?
Yep. And don't let the cynical British historians get you down. There's no way that was entirely impersonal for those guys. No way in hell. You just you look at pictures. There were a few pictures from that. And you look at the guys in those pictures. Yeah, you look at the guys in those pictures, and there's no way this is. Yeah, they are happy. They are happy to.
Yeah, they're sharing. They're sharing gifts, little things. It's great.
Yeah, there's no way in hell that was totally impersonal for those hard bitten regulars. Yeah. No, that was a moment of humanity, and I don't care what any cynical British guy has to say about it.
What's that line from Willy Wonka? "So shines a good deed in a weary world," or whatever. It's very much like that.
It is.
And there's that scene in All Quiet on the Western Front, a famous scene that is present in every, the book and every single film adaptation of it, where the main character bayonets the Frenchman at the end, and he immediately regrets it and sits there in this shell hole that's filled with water, watching him die and trying to save his life, and immediately looking after he dies, going through his wallet and looking at the pictures of his wife, and really sad stuff. But this message, I think, is so important that people really need to hear right now, because as much as we might want to deny it or not think about it, we are right now on the precipice of World War III.
Yep.
And I'm not saying it's going to happen. I sure hope not. But all the pieces are in place.
Yeah, the stage is certainly being set.
The stage is set.
World wars have been fought over much less.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So. And I think this is important stuff, not only from that angle, but also the understanding, as Ace pointed out early on in the conversation. Hobbes was wrong. Hobbes was wrong. I can't say that enough. Hobbes was wrong. Mankind is not this violent creature that we've been led to believe. That there is violence in man's hearts, but more often than not, it is tamped and controlled by our moral selves. And that's an important thing to remember about people generally.
Yeah.
And if you don't buy into that, just evolutionary psychology or biological the idea of preserving the species.
Right, exactly. Right. I will post a link to, there's an Odyssey upload. That's how I watched it. A link to that will be in the description of the episode, of this episode. You'll be able to find it down there. And I recommend watching it. I really, really do. Yeah. I will also post, I think I will post the two documentaries that I watched about the Christmas truce, because that is a fascinating story in itself. And, why don't you give plugs?
Yeah, so you can find my work at vitaldescent.com or at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org. We're currently doing our winter fundraiser, and we could really use your support. It's a 501c3, so you can write off your donation on your taxes. And if you go through that, you can see all the kickbacks that we give you. And one of them is a limited run Libertarian Institute t-shirt that I think will be really cool to have in like 30 years. You can be like, I was there during that time.
Yeah. Right. All right.
Excellent. I also want to pull up, I'm just curious. I know you need to pee. I'm just curious.
It went away. No, it went away a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. Oh goodness. I don't know what that means.
No. I did not pee in a bottle under the desk. Legitimately.
Although you're totally free to.
Yeah.
Okay. Episode 27 of Liberty Weekly was the first episode that I did with you. And then we did another one on episode 147. That's when that was. Nice. And I think it was 27. I'm not sure. It was 27 of my show. I don't know what it was of your show. I can't find it. But I am that. Let's see. That was uploaded in 2017, and I am proud to have known you since 2017. I think that you are sort of a. I have great respect for you. I credit you in part with my decision in the way that I'm leading my life and becoming a lawyer to some extent. Credit for that goes to you. And so episode 25 of yours, so very close to the same time. I'm proud to have known you that long. I think you're doing amazing work, and I'm happy to call you a friend and to have had the opportunity to speak with you again on a show.
Yeah, me too. I look forward to it, and I really appreciate talking through a lot of this stuff. Really helped me out tonight. So thank you guys for that, and I'm glad we got to meet each other at Childerberg.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, you do such great work. Like I like my favorite people are like the committed anti-war people in the liberty movement. Like you guys are just like always consistent on this and never wavering, and that's really honorable.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Excellent stuff.
Ace, you have where's your Substack, dude?
Oh yeah, that thing. So
where's the post?
Story. Okay.
Well, speaking of Ace, both of you guys need to write and submit things to the Institute.
I've been thinking about it. I was in a brain fog for a while, so like I was just like not in the mood to write. I would sit there and stare at my screen and I'd be like, nothing's just. I know what I need to write, but the words just aren't coming. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But no, on my Substack. So I know I'm pulling a George R.R. Martin right now, and I'm saying it'll be done. Trust me, it'll be out 7 years later.
Well, remember this is coming out on Christmas, so you have time. If you make a commitment now, you do have time to fulfill it.
So here's what happened. I'll tell people exactly why, and I'm not justifying it. I'll just explain to you what happened. I am running a D&D game right now, and I have to put in I have to put in some work for that to make sure my players don't hate me. And I had to say, okay, I need to focus on this for now, and then after the game is over, then I'll finish up the writing. So that is what happened. You guys can hate me and give me a comment saying how much I lied. That's fine. I just want you to know that is why I have not posted the article yet. So that's what happened.
All right. Well, this comes out on the 25th, so there's time.
Christmas Day. Yeah. So Dean, do you have any plugs?
Not really. I mean, Pacing Jouska's on Twitter, Jouska. Outside of that, man, I'm in deep bar prep territory, so I'm not going to be doing much of anything anywhere. In fact, I do have a thread on. I have a thread that I'm doing of the music that I'm listening to during bar prep. It's just screenshots of my title as I'm sitting here doing bar prep.
Okay.
And that's probably going to be where most of my energy is going most days.
Fair. All right. Well, yeah, I think that's all I have. So, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Oh, I pulled this clip too. Let's head out on this one.
Merry Christmas, Fritz. Merry Christmas, Fritz.
Merry Christmas, Fritzy.